There's a strange pattern that shows up in almost every story of someone getting played. It's not that they didn't see it coming. It's not that there were no signs. It's that they heard something that should have been a warning, and they let it slide. They filed it away as nothing. A throwaway comment, a quirky phrase, something said too casually to mean anything serious. But it meant everything. Because here's the truth about manipulation that most people never fully grasp. People rarely play you in silence. They announce it first. They tell you in their own words exactly what's about to happen, not because they're being generous or honest, but because the words serve a purpose. They're laying groundwork. They're setting up a story they'll need later, one where they come out looking clean and you come out looking like you should have known better. This video isn't about red flags you should memorize like a checklist. It's about understanding why certain phrases exist in the first place, what psychological function they serve, what they reveal about the internal architecture of the person saying them, long before anything goes visibly wrong. By the end of this, you'll understand something that most people spend years figuring out the hard way. The difference between someone who's being genuinely transparent and someone who's building an alibi in real time. The first thing worth understanding is that manipulation almost never looks manipulative in the moment. That's the entire point of it. If someone were obviously trying to use you, if their intentions were written across their face, you'd walk away. You'd protect yourself. Your instincts would kick in and you'd create distance. So the language has to feel safe. It has to sound reasonable. It has to come wrapped in something that feels like honesty or vulnerability or even flattery. It has to create a certain kind of emotional atmosphere where your guard drops, where your pattern recognition quiets down, where you start thinking, maybe I'm just being paranoid. Maybe I need to be more trusting. That thought, that exact moment of self-doubt is not an accident. That's the design working. One of the clearest examples of this mechanism is what we might call the exception frame. It sounds like this: I don't usually do this, or this isn't like me at all, or I've never felt this way about someone before. On the surface, this seems like a compliment, like you're being told you're special, like something about you, your presence, your energy, your essence has unlocked a version of this person that nobody else gets to see. You're the exception to their rules. You're different from everyone who came before. And that's exactly what it's designed to feel like. But here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. That phrase isn't really about you. It's about them. It's creating psychological distance between who they claim to be and what they're about to do. It's a preemptive excuse, a way of saying in advance, whatever happens next, whatever I do, however I act, remember that this isn't the real me. This is the exception. And exceptions don't count the same way. When someone frames their behavior as an exception, they're not being vulnerable with you. They're being strategic. They're telling you before anything has even happened that they won't be held fully accountable for what comes next because it wasn't really them. It was something that came over them, a momentary departure from their true character. And here's the part that catches most people completely off guard. The phrase usually works. It creates a feeling of instant intimacy that seems earned but isn't. It accelerates emotional trust far beyond what the actual history would justify. And when things fall apart later, when the behavior repeats, when the pattern becomes undeniable, when the exception turns out to be the rule, you're left wondering how you missed it. But you didn't miss it. You heard it clearly. You just didn't understand what you were hearing. There's another type of phrase that operates on a completely different level. It doesn't frame behavior as an exception. It frames the entire person as a kind of ongoing project, something unfinished, something broken in a beautiful way, something you're subtly invited to help fix. It sounds like this: I'm just really bad at relationships, or I always end up messing things up, or I'm kind of a disaster when it comes to this stuff. Fair warning, on the surface, this looks like honesty, refreshing honesty, even self-awareness. A willingness to own their flaws without pretending to be perfect. And in some cases, in genuinely healthy people working through genuine struggles, that's exactly what it is. People do have patterns they're trying to break. People do recognize their own damage and talk about it openly. But there's another version of this phrase that isn't honesty at all. It's insulation. When someone tells you up front that they're bad at something, especially something that requires emotional responsibility, like being a consistent partner, like showing up when it matters, they're not giving you a warning so you can make an informed decision. They're negotiating the terms of future disappointment. They're saying, I'm going to let you down eventually. That's almost guaranteed. But when I do, you can't act surprised. You can't hold it against me because I told you I was honest from the beginning. So really, whose fault is it? That's not vulnerability. That's a strategy wearing vulnerability's clothing. And the effect is subtle but extraordinarily powerful. It shifts the entire burden of expectation onto you. If they act carelessly, if they disappear at critical moments, if they fail to show up the way a real relationship requires, well, they warned you. You knew what you signed up for. You chose this. So how can you really be upset? This is one of the hidden reasons why certain people seem to attract partners who forgive them endlessly. It's not that they're so charming they can get away with anything. It's that they've installed a frame, a mental architecture where accountability was diluted before anything even happened. They planted a story early. And once that story is living in your head, excuses start to feel reasonable, disappointments start to feel expected, and leaving starts to feel like your failure, not theirs. Something shifts around the 2 or 3 minute mark of most interactions with someone who's subtly positioning you. You start to notice that the conversation isn't quite balanced the way normal conversations are. They're asking you questions, a lot of questions. They seem curious about your life, your work, your goals, your history, your wounds, and it feels good. It feels like genuine interest, like someone finally wants to know the real you. But if you pay close attention, if you step outside the warm glow of being asked about yourself, you might notice something else. The questions aren't random. They're not just getting to know you. They're searching for something specific. Usually they're searching for gaps, emotional gaps, social gaps, unmet needs that haven't been filled by anyone else. And when they find one, they don't just make a mental note, they respond to it. They position themselves directly inside that gap. If you mention feeling overlooked at work, undervalued, unseen, suddenly they become the person who truly sees your potential. If you mention feeling disconnected from old friends, like nobody really gets you anymore, suddenly they become the one person who finally understands. If you mention past relationships where you weren't appreciated, where your efforts weren't matched, suddenly they become appalled by how you were treated, and they would never do that. This mechanism is called mirroring. And in healthy relationships, it happens naturally. People connect by finding genuine common ground. They reflect each other's values because those values are authentically shared. It's part of how intimacy builds over time. But there's a version of mirroring that isn't natural at all. It's performed. And the clearest giveaway is speed. Real alignment develops slowly. You discover shared interests and overlapping values over weeks, sometimes months. There's a process of revelation that can't be rushed. But when someone seems to mirror you too quickly, when they appear to understand you completely within the first few conversations, when they hit every emotional note perfectly right out of the gate, it's worth pausing to ask yourself a difficult question. Are they actually connecting with you, or are they constructing something that looks like connection? Because people who are about to play, you don't need to understand you. They just need to seem like they do. And seeming is much faster than being. There's a phrase that often surfaces once this mirroring phase is well underway. It's one of the most disarming things someone can say in early interaction, and it almost always lands exactly as intended. It sounds like this: I feel like I can tell you anything. Or it's crazy. I've never opened up to someone this fast before. Or I don't know what it is about you, but I just trust you. This phrase accomplishes something very clever. It creates a feeling of mutual vulnerability, even though only one person has actually been vulnerable. You hear that they're opening up to you, that you're special enough to receive their inner world, and somewhere in that moment, an unspoken pressure appears, a pressure to reciprocate, to match their openness with your own, to prove that the connection is real by offering something equally personal in return. And that's when the dynamic starts to tilt in their favor, because now you've given them something, a fear you carry, a wound that still stings, a piece of your history that you don't share casually with just anyone. And they didn't earn it through time. They didn't earn it through consistency. They earned it through a well-placed phrase. A single sentence designed to accelerate intimacy past what the actual relationship would support. This is one of the core reasons why people who've been manipulated so often describe feeling like things moved too fast. Not necessarily physically, emotionally. Like intimacy was accelerated past what was really warranted. Like they gave too much of themselves too soon and only realized the imbalance in hindsight. That acceleration isn't accidental. It's engineered. The phrase, "I feel like I can tell you anything," isn't a genuine confession. It's an invitation. And the person extending the invitation benefits far more than the person who accepts. By this point in the interaction, a subtle but critical shift has already occurred. The person doing the playing is no longer operating from honesty, if they ever were. They're operating from positioning. They've established themselves as an exception, or as a project, or as someone who uniquely understands you. They've manufactured a sense of emotional closeness that feels deep, but was assembled quickly. And now they need to protect what they've built, which means that any doubt you begin to feel, any instinct that something doesn't quite add up, has to be managed, has to be neutralized before it can grow into a real question. This is where a particularly effective phrase tends to show up. It sounds like this: you're overthinking this, or you're reading way too much into things, or why are you making such a big deal out of nothing? These aren't observations about your mental state. They're redirections. They take your instincts, your gut sense that something is off, that you're being handled rather than heard, and they flip the frame entirely. Suddenly, the issue isn't what they said or did. The issue is how you're reacting to it. The spotlight moves off their behavior and onto your response. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, you know exactly how effective it can be. Doubt is uncomfortable. Self-doubt is worse. And in that moment, it's so much easier to believe that you're being paranoid, that you need to calm down, that you're sabotaging something good, than to confront the possibility that your instincts are accurate and you've been misread from the very beginning. So you back off. Maybe you apologize for being suspicious. You tell yourself you need to relax. You need to be more trusting. You're lucky to have someone so patient with your anxieties, and that's exactly what they wanted. The phrase, "you're overthinking it," doesn't resolve your concern. It buries it. And the more often it gets used, the harder it becomes to trust your own perception. That erosion of self-trust isn't a side effect of the phrase, it's the function. There's a specific category of phrase that tends to emerge when things start moving towards seriousness. When commitment becomes a real question on the table, when the other person is faced with a choice, either show up genuinely or find a reason not to. This is when you'll often hear something like, "I just don't want to hurt you." On the surface, it sounds thoughtful, caring, like they're holding back, not out of selfishness, but out of concern, like they're protecting you from something, maybe even protecting you from themselves. But look closer at what that phrase actually accomplishes. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't provide clarity about their intentions or their feelings. What it does is shift emotional weight. Now, if they pull back, it's not because they were never serious about you. It's because they cared too much. If they disappear, it's not abandonment, it's protection. The story stays clean, their reputation stays intact, and you're left carrying the confusion alone. Here's what makes this phrase especially tricky. It almost always shows up right before someone does the exact thing they claim to be trying to avoid. They say, "I don't want to hurt you." And then they hurt you. But now there's a narrative attached, a softening filter. They tried. They warned you. They were being careful. Can you really blame them for something they never wanted to do? When someone genuinely doesn't want to hurt you, they don't announce it. They simply don't hurt you. They show up. They follow through. They're consistent over time. The warning isn't necessary because the behavior speaks clearly enough on its own. So when that phrase appears, especially early, especially dramatically, it's not protection, it's preparation. It's stage setting for an exit that hasn't happened yet. Now here's where things become more practical. Understanding these phrases is valuable, but knowing how to respond to them is where real change happens. And the instinct most people have, the one that feels safest, the one that seems most direct, is to confront, to call out the phrase, to say, "Wait, are you manipulating me right now? Is this some kind of game?" But that almost never works. It puts the other person on the defensive immediately. It escalates the conversation into conflict. And perhaps most importantly, it often makes you look paranoid or unstable, which conveniently feeds directly into the same narrative they've been building from the beginning. So here's a different approach, one that doesn't require confrontation, doesn't create drama, but gives you something far more valuable: information. When you hear one of these phrases, an exception frame, a self-deprecating disclaimer, an accusation that you're overthinking, don't react immediately. Don't challenge it. Don't withdraw or get defensive yourself. Instead, slow down. Ask a follow-up question, something neutral, something that creates space without creating conflict. Something like, "What do you mean by that?" Or "Can you tell me more?" Or simply, "Help me understand." What you're doing is giving them room to either explain themselves with genuine depth or expose the thinness of what they said. Because people who are being honest will have something substantive behind the phrase. They'll elaborate, they'll offer context and nuance, they'll welcome the question because it gives them a chance to be understood more fully. But people who are positioning you won't have that depth. They'll get uncomfortable when pressed, they'll deflect, they'll repeat the same phrase in slightly different words without actually adding anything. Or, and this is the clearest tell of all, they'll flip it back on to you. Why are you asking? Why do you need to analyze everything? Why can't you just trust them? That response, that subtle redirection away from their words and back onto your behavior tells you everything, not the phrase itself. But what happens when the phrase is gently questioned? There's one more layer to all of this that's worth sitting with before we close. Most people who get played don't get played because they're naive. They don't get played because they're stupid or inexperienced or bad at reading people. They get played because they're generous. They give the benefit of the doubt. They assume good intent. They believe in second chances and fresh starts, and none of that is wrong. The problem isn't generosity itself. The problem is misdirected generosity. It's extending trust before trust has been earned. It's accepting a phrase at face value because questioning it feels unkind. It's believing the version of someone that they're presenting instead of waiting to see the version that emerges over time. But here's what's actually kind: holding people to their words, expecting behavior to match promises, creating enough space for someone to show you who they really are, not just tell you. When someone says, "I don't usually do this," the genuinely kind response isn't to believe them immediately. It's to watch, to give them the opportunity to prove that the exception is real, not performed. When someone says, "I don't want to hurt you," the genuinely kind response isn't to reassure them. It's to wait, to observe whether their actions over weeks and months actually match that stated intention. Kindness isn't the same thing as gullibility. Kindness is giving someone a fair chance to be consistent while staying grounded enough in your own perception to notice when they're not. Understanding these phrases doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It means recognizing when words are serving a purpose beyond their surface and knowing when to watch instead of react. Because the difference between being played and being chosen often comes down to one thing: whether someone sees you as an option to manage or as someone they genuinely want. And that's where things get interesting. Because while some people use language to create distance, others send signals they can't hide. Signals that reveal genuine attraction before a single word is spoken. The next video shows you exactly what those signals look like. 30 specific signs that tell you without any guessing that women find you attractive, even if they haven't said it.